1 week season.
What is going on, OWS fam, YouTube fam, DFS fam? Welcome to the week 9 edition of the OWS Angles podcast. I am your host, I am your guest, I am JMToWin. As always, throw this baby on 1.5x speed or 2x speed, and let's get started with a pretty wide open week 11 game slate. Lots of teams with high totals, lots of tight spread, high total game environments, lots of injuries, some that we have answers on at this point in the week, some that we don't. I'm recording this on Friday at 2:30 on the East Coast, 11:30 on the West Coast. So still waiting on some final injury news to shake out this week. And that'll obviously change some things, but we have a lot of information and news in hand. And anyway, we're not trying to break down the best plays on the slate in this spot or come to conclusions so much as we are trying to lay out a whole bunch of information for you in this podcast and help you get a feel for how the slate shapes up, how we want to attack this slate. As we always talk about, first off, DFS is not about knowing who the good plays are. DFS is a game of strategy, of game theory, of roster construction. And every week is a unique puzzle that we are trying to figure out how to solve in order to get to first place, second place, those top of the leaderboard finishes, because that's where our money is made in DFS. And so this podcast is generally about kind of taking an overview look and getting a sense of how this slate shapes up from that puzzle construction standpoint. What does the picture on the box look like for this week's puzzle? And so is this a podcast that we're going to continue with next year? I don't know. At this point, we've talked about this already a few times, but we try to eliminate just being redundant. I try to not talk about the same things in this podcast that I talk about in the player grid or in my show with Pete Overzet or in my show with Squirrel Patrol. If you're new here, if you never watched this before, I provide content on oneweekseason.com, provide my player grid, which is my tight player pool for the week, broken down all these plays by tiers and whatnot. And then I have these couple other podcasts. So we try to make sure that I'm not hitting on the same information in all of these. But yeah, this has become a podcast where with these other podcasts added in, maybe it's not something we keep up with next year. But for now, we still have this podcast and kind of taking a look at how the slate shapes up and how we want to be thinking about this slate. So diving into the overview here, we've got 22 teams on this slate. 10 of those 22 teams are implied to score 25 or more points. Over the last couple of years, it wouldn't be unusual to only have 4 or 5 teams on a slate this size implied to score 25 or more points. So that's quite a few, having 10 out of 22 teams implied to score 25 or more. Let's take a look at how these teams line up, though, how these implied point totals are constructed. So we've got, I'll go through kind of 4 different categories here. So there are 3 different categories here. So the first category is the Rams implied to score 29, the Packers implied to score 28.75, the Lions implied to score 28.5, the Chargers implied to score 26.5. All of these are more than touchdown favorites, actually more than one score favorites. The Lions are 8.5 point favorites over Minnesota. Chargers are 9.5 point favorites at Tennessee. Packers are 13 point favorites at home against Carolina, and the Rams are 14 point favorites at home against the Saints. So again, Rams expected to score 29 points, but in a pretty easy win. How much are they pushed? How much volume do we see? How many yards do we see pile up? Yes, touchdowns are an important part of DFS scoring. That's where we get our ceiling. That's where those asymmetric jumps in scoring happen. A guy catches 8 passes for 90 yards, that's 17 DraftKings points. Adds a touchdown to 23, adds 2 touchdowns to 29. So touchdowns make a big difference. Where are the teams that we can expect touchdowns to be scored? That's a big part of understanding where we can access our upside in DFS. And because of that, we focus on point totals a lot. But we also have to recognize that a 29-point score in a game like this is different from a 29-point score. A 29-point team score is different than a game where we're seeing a 29 to 35 point game, right? And both teams are staying aggressive deep into the game, and we're having this opportunity for not only points pile up on the scoreboard and touchdowns pile up, but also yards to pile up, right? So if the Rams score 29 points, but they're getting short fields off Tyler Shuck, or they're getting a defensive touchdown or whatever it might be, then we don't have the opportunity for those yards to pile up in a meaningful way, or the volume in PPR scoring to pile up in a meaningful way. So that's what we're dealing with these 4 teams: the Rams, the Packers, the Lions, the Chargers. Which team is likeliest to be pushed? I would have to say the Lions is the likeliest team to be pushed. Minnesota has not shown, especially with J.J. McCarthy coming back this week, they've not shown that we can feel confident in their ability to do that. I think that if the Vikings are able to keep this game close, it's likelier to be in a low-scoring game. And I don't think a low-scoring game is all that likely. The Lions have scored 30, 30, 31, and 31 in their last 4 games against Brian Flores' defense. They have a good feel for this defense and how to attack it. And so I expect the Lions to do well here, and it's going to be hard for the Vikings to keep pace, given that the Lions defense is still relatively healthy, is playing really well, given that the Vikings haven't looked good so far with J.J. McCarthy. They've been trying to limit that passing volume for J.J. McCarthy, similar to what they did with Sam Darnold through the first 6, 7, 8 games of last season before they finally cut him loose. And so not likely to be pushed, but it could be competitive deeper into the game to where we have a greater chance of seeing one of those big games come from the Lions. We also know that we have these games from the Lions where they're willing to throw the ball deep into the game. So we've seen these games where Jared Goff only throws the ball 26 times, but he has 5 passing touchdowns. So something like that is also within the realm of possibilities here in this spot. But we got these 4 games, teams with high implied team totals, but should win their games fairly easily. And so the opportunity for volume to pile up through the air, the opportunity for yards to pile up in addition to touchdowns, a little bit thinner than those implied point totals might make it seem. The next group, we've got 4 teams that are in more close spread games. So the Colts implied to score 26.75 at the Steelers with a close spread. The Bears implied to score 26.75 at the Bengals with a close spread. The 49ers implied to score 25.75 at the Giants with a close spread. And then the Patriots relatively close spread against the Falcons, but implied to score 25 at home against the Falcons. And so here we have spots where the game environment could develop in such a way that instead of getting the 26.75 from the Colts, the 26.75 from the Bears, we're actually getting the 31, the 35, the 38-point game because you have that sort of back and forth where one team is pushed. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be a 38 to 35 game if we have one of those, but it could be one of those 38 to 28 games. Or like we saw last week with the Packers and the Steelers, where it was 35 to 25. The Steelers only scored 25, but they were ahead at halftime. It was competitive throughout that game, and it was putting the Packers in a posture of aggressiveness deeper into that game to where those points were able to pile up on the Packers side, and we were able to take advantage of that in DFS. And so that's kind of what we're looking at in these games, is where we might be able to have one of these games where both teams are scoring, and this team with this high implied point total is actually being pushed to have heavier passing volume deeper into the game, to be aggressive deeper into the game. And so these 4 games are in a different category than those other 4 games. These 4 offenses are in a different category than those other 4 offenses, because again, we have game environments that could pile up in such a way that points are scored. Actually taking things a step further, so again, not trying to drill all the way down to who are my favorite plays on the slate. We'll cover that in the player grade. We've talked about that in some other podcasts and whatnot, but talking about these game environments and how I rank them, right? The Bears and Bengals, it feels highly likely that as long as Joe Flacco's shoulder holds up, looks like he's going to play this week, as long as his shoulder holds up well enough, it feels highly likely that we get both of these teams scoring points in this game, which increases the chances of the scoring really taking off in this game. Same thing in Colts and Steelers. The one risk factor in Colts at Steelers is, well, let's throw 2 risk factors out there. We've had the Colts playing mostly indoors this year. They've only played 1 game outdoors. So you do have a team that's been absolutely tremendous this season, putting up points, but they are playing outdoors in this spot for only the 2nd time this year. So, maybe that dents things a little bit. And then we have this Steelers team, the most expensive defense in the NFL, one of the 2, 3, 4 worst defenses in the NFL, especially against good offense, especially against passing attacks. But would we put it past Mike Tomlin to have one of those random games where he figures things out, it's a field goal fest, and they win this game 18-15 or lose this game 18-15, something like that. So I think we have to think about that here. I have actually been talking this week about the idea of think about looking through game logs at the end of the year and looking through Daniel Jones game logs, and it's mostly these 17 points, 21 points, 22 points, DraftKings scoring. But would it surprise us if we look at this game against the Steelers and it's 31, 33, right? He's probably going to have a couple of those games this season. And would it be surprising if this game against the Steelers defense is one of the games, especially because the Steelers, I just gave out the case for the Steelers to make this lower scoring. I'm going to tie all this back together, but the Steelers are not an offense that's simply going to let another team just run away with a game against them. Aaron Rodgers is generally going to be able to figure out a way to keep his team in a game. And so because of that, if the Colts are scoring, that sort of forces the Steelers to be scoring against this pretty poor Steelers or pretty poor Colts secondary. And all of a sudden we have one of these games where both teams are scoring. The Colts are staying aggressive deeper into this game. This quarterback in Daniel Jones, who's been, Lord Reeves has been on top of this with his work with Sharp Football Analysis. I think he's brought this up on the Searching for Ceiling podcast as well on the One Week Season podcast feed. But the Daniel Jones has been the number one fantasy quarterback in the first half of games this year, but he's something like QB 20 in the second half of games, right? Well, what if he has to be the QB 1 throughout the entirety of this game? That wouldn't surprise us. And then you look through game logs at the end of the year and you're like, oh yeah, he had this one outlier game here and maybe another one of those at a different point in the season. But it also, on the flip side of that, shouldn't surprise us if this is a game that goes the other direction, where we have this outlier scenario the other way, where it's, this Steelers team that's not favored to win their division, in spite of the fact that they're so far ahead of the Ravens, and there probably won't be a wild card spot available for the AFC North, right? Because you've got three really good teams in the AFC West. Are certainly not high that we get a wild card team from the AFC South. And then after that, they're not all that high that we get a wild card team from the AFC North. And so you got to be thinking about winning this division. And that means you got to be staying ahead of the Ravens. You got to be winning games like this that you can win. And so the Steelers certainly could come out with one of those random signature Mike Tomlin wins. And so sort of a broad range of outcomes here, which has this game slotting below the Bears and Bengals. Also, another factor is Bears and Bengals, we know where the ball is going on the Bengals side. On the Bears side, we know that they're leaning into the run, kind of a split backfield, but we know that we're going to get points from the backfield. Still waiting on DeAndre Swift news, actually. So there is a chance that Swift is out and Monungai is just like the smash play of the weekend this week. But yeah, I slot this Colts Steelers game below the Bears and Bengals game, but it's certainly up there in terms of where game environments could develop. 49ers and Giants is sort of a tier below that, and then Patriots and Falcons is a tier below that. But here we have 4 teams implied to score 25 plus points in closer spread games. And then the last 2 teams, so we've covered 8 of the 10 teams implied to score 25 plus. The last 2 are in the same game together, the mother of all games. That is Chiefs and Bills, the Bills' annual regular season Super Bowl. Hey, they're 4-0 in their regular season Super Bowls of late. So maybe they get another one here. Chiefs and Bills both implied to score over 25. Chiefs implied for 27. Buffalo implied for 25.5. And this is one of those games where when we think about where we have certainty on this slate, we have a pretty high level of certainty that these teams are going to ask their quarterbacks to put on their Superman capes relatively early in this one. And so that opens opportunities for scoring to pile up. Before we go any deeper, I want to talk really quickly about how I generally attack small field play. And small field play, you can say anything under 2,000 entries, but especially anything under 1,000 entries, which are the tournaments that I most like to focus on, kind of these higher dollar, smaller field contests. And so what I'm typically thinking about in small field play is where can we find the most concentrated, high confidence bets? So last week, let's rewind back to week 8 and try to remember what things looked like in week 8. So recording shows on Friday, creating content on Friday, Lamar Jackson was central to me on that slate. So you may recall, Lamar Jackson ended up not playing. We got that news late, but Lamar was so central for me because it was a slate that was lacking certainty. And there was such high certainty that the Ravens would score 30 plus points. They had done that in 14 of Lamar Jackson's previous 17 starts. And he's typically a big part of that scoring. And so in a game against the Bears defense with a Bears offense that just in terms of the posture of their offense, you look to the other side, you're the Ravens, even if your defense is coming off the bye playing better, you've got Lamar Jackson, you're putting up points, you're still looking at that Bears offense with Ben Johnson calling plays, with Ben Johnson's aggressiveness and thinking, we have to stay aggressive, we have to keep scoring points deeper into this game. And so there's a lot of certainty on my end around how well Lamar would perform. Did I feel confident that he was going to put up the highest score in the slate? No, like there's so much up in the air with that. But in terms of, do I feel confident the points are coming here? Yes. And then that becomes a great starting point. So we're going to rewind even further into week 8 and tell a little story. If you were reading my late week content last week, you caught this. But if you've just watched me on podcasts or stuff in front of the paywall, little story from last week. So I was sick last week. And most of you know, if you're watching this, I live in Oregon. They took DraftKings away from us in Oregon a few years ago. And I don't play FanDuel. I don't write content for FanDuel. So instead of playing on FanDuel, I fly to California. I fly to Oakland every week on Tuesday to reserve my entries. You can reserve from a legal state, edit those from any state that you're in, from anywhere in the world, actually. So I fly to Oakland, reserve my entries, fly back home, and then I'm able to build my rosters on Saturday night, Sunday morning. So last week I was sick on Monday, Tuesday. I've actually been sick since week 1, but it had gotten worse last week. And I was thinking, man, I might just skip my flight this week, cancel my flight, and just take a bye week, right? In the past, I would typically take at least one bye week throughout the season. And then I'll just, for content, I'll sort of trick my mind throughout the week into thinking that I'm playing, and then just sort of have the night off on Saturday night where I don't have to build rosters. But this season, I've been in such a groove and I've been so enjoying things with my new content structure and watching all the games and thinking through the games, and that I really didn't want to take a bye week. And I knew that at the end of the week, at the end of week 8, I was going to be glad that I had flown on Tuesday to go reserve those entries. So powered through, flew, I'm flying back home, and I'm about 20 minutes from landing in Portland. And I just started thinking, I'm really glad that I pushed through and flew today. My mind was foggy. I didn't feel great, sick, tired. But it was like, I'm going to be glad on Saturday that I get to play this slate. And then I realized I sat there at the Oakland airport for 2 hours watching games on my phone and forgot to reserve entries. Literally never opened the DraftKings app, never reserved entries, flew for absolutely no reason. And so I spent the week kind of in that bye week mindset of like, I'm going to create content assuming that I am still going to be playing this week, even though it looks like I'm not going to be playing this week. And then as I got deeper into the week, I started thinking, man, I might try to find a way to fly on Saturday. So I was looking for flights on Saturday, trying to find a way to fly out. Ended up getting this Lamar Jackson roster that I love so much. It was like, okay, I'm definitely finding a way to fly on Saturday night, even if it's like a late night red eye, fly back Sunday morning. And then ended up with Lamar not playing. It was like, okay, I'm not going to push it. I'm not going to fly out this week. So didn't play last week, but updated my journal and then the player grid with the following thoughts. So basically, since Lamar was out on a week with very low certainty, again, getting back to how I attack these smaller field contests, with Lamar out on a week with very low certainty, I felt that the highest certainty spots for points being scored at the quarterback position were Jalen Hurts and Bo Nix. And so laid out in my journal and in the player grid that if I were playing, my single entry 3-max set would have been about 45% Jalen Hurts, 15% Bo Nix, 8% apiece of Drake May, Justin Fields, Joe Flacco, Kirk Cousins, and Josh Allen. So again, Hurts hit last week, Bo Nix hit last week, Drake May hit, Justin Fields sort of hit, Joe Flacco hit, Cousins bombed, and Josh Allen didn't put up a big score. But I didn't bother building my official Drake May, Justin Fields, Joe Flacco, Kirk Cousins, or Josh Allen rosters. But because I've been in such a groove with building and have been so enjoying this DFS season, on Saturday night, rather than taking the night off, I spent 3 hours sitting there and building what would have been my official final Jalen Hurts and Bo Nix rosters. Of the 8 rosters I set aside, 7 of them would have finished in the money, and I would have been top 5 in contests with a couple of those rosters. Well, my focuses on those rosters were 2 player pairings, because on a week with very little certainty, but some injuries or some spots where we felt confident that points would pile up, it was like, okay, where can I just take certainty on a week with very little certainty? I thought it was going to be a low scoring week. And so where could I find the most concentrated high certainty bets? So for me, it was, the Broncos were playing the Dallas pass defense. Whenever Bo Nix hits, the pairing of Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims hits. So had Franklin plus Mims on a bunch of those rosters. Obviously, in large field play, you want to pick between the 2 guys. Hopefully you pick Troy Franklin, he has the big week, and you benefit in that way. But because these were smaller field contests that I was not playing, but I was building for, Franklin plus Mims, putting them together. Devontae Smith plus Dallas Goedert, putting them onto rosters together, and Devon Achane plus Jalen Waddle, putting them onto rosters together. None of these pairings, Franklin and Mims hit for a high point per dollar because of what Franklin did, but the other ones didn't hit for high point per dollar, and yet I had these guys on rosters. You had Jonathan Taylor to those rosters, and all of a sudden, or Saquon Barkley to those rosters, which were some of these rosters that I had, you're getting 3x, 3.5x salary multipliers on these pairings of Devontae and Goddard, Achane and Waddle. And then you add in this, the high returns on Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley. All of a sudden, these rosters are sitting in the top 5 spots in these smaller field contests. And it's not from trying to just pack in as much ceiling as possible, so much as it's saying, where can we layer in certainty with ceiling? And so it was a very unique week. To be clear, I'm not seeing many pairings like this on this particular week, a much more wide open week. I think that the score required to win tournaments will be much higher this week. But last week, just thinking through, okay, where's the highest certainty? So it started with Lamar. Lamar gets taken off the slate. It goes down to Bo Nix and Jalen Hurts. And then you start saying, okay, where else can we pile in certainty on a slate like this? It was the Franklin and Mims pairing. It was the Devontae and Goddard pairing. It was the H. and Waddle pairing. All high confidence, concentrated offenses where Devontae and Goddard were benefiting from A.J. Brown being out. H. and Waddle still benefiting from Tyreek Hill being out. And so, just an interesting look at how I was looking at last week. So as I talked about last week, I liked Hurts and Nix because they were the highest probability bets for 25 plus DK points. I liked Flacco and Chase because I was highly confident that the Bengals would be passing the ball. And if they're passing the ball, it's going to be Flacco throwing the ball to Jamar Chase. So bringing it back to this week, we looked at the games, but what did we see like that this week? So before we get to that, I wanted to do a quick shout out for statrankings.com. I've been mentioning them every week on this podcast. You guys know that we have a partnership with Stat Rankings. If you go to statrankings.com and click on the DFS tab, it'll send you over to 1 week season. But again, this site that's being built up by Kevin Adams, where it is pulling in thousands of stats and data sets, and every week it is building onto it. And again, as we've been mentioning every week, right now, everything on the site is free, including lots of stats that are behind the paywalls on lots of other sites. All you do is sign up for a free account. You're not going to get spammed. You're not going to try to get sold anything. Sign up for a free account and you'll have access to all of these stats, including stats that are behind the paywall on a lot of other sites. So if you are doing research, if you're diving into things and trying to find your answers to stuff like this, go over to statrankings.com. Okay, so what do we see this week like that where we have this confidence, where we have a higher level of certainty? And that's where things get interesting, as this week looks really wide open with lower certainty across the board. But as I said, with higher ceiling than last week, where last week you could win some of these smaller field contests with 175 DraftKings points, I don't think this week lines up like that. So higher ceiling, lower certainty, and ownership is reflecting this. We're seeing a handful of guys popping with 30% projected ownership, but then it pretty quickly scales down to guys across the board with sub 10% projected ownership, which speaks to the lower certainty on this particular slate. So that high level looks spectacular, it looks exciting, it looks explosive with 10 teams implied to score 25 plus points, even some of these teams with closer spreads. But again, if we look a little bit more closely, we see the Rams 14-point favorites, their wideouts are appropriately priced, they've got a split backfield, the lead back is high priced. Do we get any tournament winning scores from this offense? I think that we get one of these 22 plus point scores from Puka Nacua, but is he putting up 30? Does he have a clear pathway to putting up 30 plus? Is this an offense that we necessarily have to go to? We have the Packers as 13-point favorites. Well, they have a spread the wealth offense. They're willing to lean into the run game with a lead. With Josh Jacobs banged up, they've been splitting the backfield work there. So do we get anything from this Packers offense that we need to be playing in tournaments this week? The Colts are one of the best offenses in NFL history so far. They're on this 2007 Patriots, 2013 Broncos pace. Crazy to say it, right? That was 2007 Patriots, that's Tom Brady, that's Randy Moss. 2013 Broncos, that's Peyton Manning, that's Demaryius Thomas. The Colts, Daniel Jones, right? It's crazy, right? Last year, people were calling for Shane Steichen's job. It was like around week 5, 6, 7 was the first time I saw that. And I was like, no, that's crazy. Shane Steichen's a tremendous coach. And then as we got to like week 13, 14, 15, it was like, oh, this is real. Like, they might actually fire Shane Steichen. Well, bring him a quarterback, Daniel Jones. All of a sudden, they're one of the best offenses in NFL history. But we have 0 games this year, in spite of the fact this is offense on a historic scoring pace. In spite of the fact that Michael Pittman's not expensive, Alec Pierce is not expensive, Tyler Warren, Josh Downs, these guys aren't even expensive. And we've had 0 games from these 4 players that would make a difference on a tournament roster this season, which is crazy to think about. With this high-scoring offense, these low-priced players. Nothing, right? Nothing that would make a difference on a tournament roster this season. We have the Bears, right? We know that the Bears are highly likely, high confidence to score points against the Bengals. But since they came out of the bye, they've been leaning into this more run-heavy approach. And then with Swift banged up, they've been splitting the backfield work there as well. So as I mentioned, if we get news that DeAndre Swift is out, he missed practice Wednesday and Thursday. He's missed at least 1 practice each of the last couple of weeks and then played on Sunday. So it's been out. Limited is what he's been done the last couple of weeks, out this week. So maybe we get no DeAndre Swift. If that's the case, Kyle Monangai becomes a tremendous play in the spot where he's going to lead this backfield. at a cheap price tag, in a great spot, high certainty that the offense is called through the run game, high certainty that the run game does well here. But without that, we have, again, an offense that's leaning into a more run-heavy approach. We could have a game where Caleb Williams is throwing the ball 26, 28, 29 times, so nobody's hitting through the passing attack. But then the split backfields, maybe we don't get that tournament winner from the backfield. And then the 49ers, they've had a hard time putting up points this season. They actually have only 2 games this year, right? They're implied to score 25.75. They have only 2 games this year over 21 points, no games over 26 points. And the Giants have been up and down on defense. So they are attackable on paper. The 49ers are certainly capable of putting up points here, but they've got some voodoo magic every once in a while. There's high variance here where this could end up being a lower scoring game where this 49ers offense is not putting everything together on the road at 10 a.m. West Coast body clock time against the Giants defense that is capable of putting together some good games. And then again, Patriots, the Falcons are unpredictable. It has been, who are the Falcons, right? They beat the Bills. They lost 30-0 to the Panthers. They went on the road and lost 20-10 to the 49ers. They lost to the Dolphins. Wait, did they beat the 49ers 20-10? Scratch that one, right? Could have that one backwards. They lost to the Dolphins in a game that nobody expected them to lose. They did lose 20-10 to the 49ers. So, who are the Falcons? It's tough to say. But we have the Patriots, this tremendous offense so far. Even with now we have news that Ramondre Stevenson's going to be out. Like, we think it's going to be TreVeyon Henderson, but what if Terrell Jennings steps in? There's that question mark. I'll dive deeper into my thoughts there in the player grid. But again, there's a lot of uncertainty on this slate is what we're getting at on all these spots with, teams that we feel confident are going to score points. And yet, how does that shake out for us for DFS? So against that backdrop of how I build for smaller field contests, how I think about this component of certainty versus ceiling. And again, like, we're targeting first place in contests. I want to make that clear. But I also want to make it clear that, we've played 8 weekends so far. Let's assume that I could have played last weekend, right? If I could have played last weekend, I would be at 4 of 8 profitable weeks so far on the season. As a tournament player, that's not the goal. Being profitable in 1 out of 8 weeks is fine if it's a big week, right? We're not excited about being profitable in 4 out of 8 weeks or 3 out of 7 weeks actually played. We're looking for that 1 week per season. If we are profitable 1 out of 17 weeks, 1 out of 18 weeks, and it's a big week and it makes up our whole season, that's fine, right? So the goal is not to be profitable, but here's what I'm illustrating here. Been on track to be profitable 4 out of 8 weeks this year, and had a second place finish in the face mask, had a 6th place finish in the face mask. That second place finish in the face mask, the 6th place finish in the face mask, I was down to the wire deciding between that team and another team for my game changer roster, the 1500 single entry. The one that I chose finished out of the money. The one that I didn't choose that finished 6th in the face mask would have finished 1st in the game changer for $100K payout. And so basically illustrating here, when we think about things through this lens in smaller field play, we can position ourselves to cash more often than the field is cashing, but also to finish at the top of tournament fields as often as, or even more often than, other people are finishing at the top of tournament fields. I had another week where I finished 16th in the double spy, but was pretty live for first place deep into the game there. And so we can be building with this mindset of where do we have the highest confidence, the highest certainty, and be cashing more frequently, which helps our ROI, but also still be positioning ourselves for those first place finishes. So where do I see the highest certainty this week? It's not necessarily on individual players, but directionally. Where do I see the highest certainty this week? The highest certainty to me, I'm going to go through some spots. The Bengals throwing the ball. High confidence, high certainty that the Bengals will throw the ball in this spot because that's how they've been playing with Joe Flacco. So we have questions around Joe Flacco with his shoulder. Seems highly likely that he's going to play, but is he as effective as he's been the last 3 weeks? We'll have to wait and see, but we do feel high confidence directionally that the Bengals will score points if Flacco is healthy enough and that they're going to be running their offense through the air. Another place where we have high confidence, the Lions producing an elite score from someone. So against the heavy blitz scheme of the Vikings, Jared Goff's been tremendous against Brian Flores, against this blitz heavy scheme. He's typically going to get the ball out quickly. And when he's getting the ball out quickly, it's typically going to be to his first read. And that first read is typically going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. So 3 of the last 4 games between these two teams, Amon-Ra St. Brown has scored 28 plus DraftKings points. He's got something like 28, 30, and 31. He has 8, 10, and 14 targets in those games. So again, he doesn't need this game to be competitive. He doesn't need the 14 target game. He can do it on 8 targets. He can do it on 10 targets in this spot, in this matchup. And then Jahmyr Gibbs, he put up 49 last year in this matchup when David Montgomery was on the bench. He put up 35 in this matchup when David Montgomery played last year. I think that the Lions are going to put up 30-plus points in this one. I think that we get one elite score, or at least really high-end score from the Lions, and it's probably coming from Amon-Ra St. Brown or Jahmyr Gibbs. Outside chance that we get both of them hitting in this spot as well, although that would probably take the Vikings keeping this game competitive, which is not the bet that I'm necessarily placing here. But Bengals throwing, high confidence. Lions producing an elite score, pretty high confidence. Another spot where we have high confidence is that the Chargers are going to score points against Tennessee, and that the backfield is flowing through Kamani Vidal. So with Hassan and Haskins on track to be out again this week, we should have another week of Kamani Vidal seeing 20-plus touches, maybe 22, 23-plus touches against a Tennessee defense that can be had for rushing yards, that is giving up the most rushing touchdowns in the NFL, and a Chargers team that, again, could start biasing their attack more and more toward the ground as they get deeper into this game. So high confidence that the Chargers will score points, high confidence that the backfield will flow through Vidal. So does that necessarily mean that he puts up an elite tournament score? No, but in terms of where we can flow directionally with high confidence, these are things we can be thinking about. So again, we're thinking ceiling while also giving ourselves a high floor of points. So these things can be applied to large field play as well. Large field play last week, you would not have wanted the Dallas Goedert plus Devontae Smith pairing unless you had Jalen Hurts on the roster. You wouldn't have wanted the Marvin Mims plus Troy Franklin pairing, maybe at all, and especially not if you had other quarterbacks on your roster. So those are smaller field types things where you say, yeah, like I'm just going to take the points. But even with larger field, just saying, where do we have the most confidence? Let's lean into that and build smart rosters around that is a great way to attack and to maximize your chances of winning those tournaments as well. Colts and Steelers scoring points. Now, we talked through the reasons, or these like, we can't point to it on paper, but it could be one of those random Mike Tomlin figure something out type games. We have to think about that. But still, when we're talking about where we have the highest confidence on the slate, one of those highest confidence spots is that the Colts and Steelers will be scoring points. I also want to make a note that if you go below the 6.4K price range in the flex spot and just say, who has the most points per game of guys under 6.4K in the flex spot on DraftKings, Michael Pittman and DK Metcalf are up there near the top in that pool. And this is a week where we should see the Steelers keeping this game close, where we should therefore see the Colts having to throw the ball deeper into this game than they typically have to, where we should also see the Steelers having to throw the ball deeper into this game than they typically have to. More than likely, 1 or 2 spiked weeks will come for Michael Pittman and DK Metcalf this season, and this would be a good spot for it to happen with both of these guys playing opposite one another. Another spot where we have high confidence, 49ers offense flowing through Christian McCaffrey. So we already talked, the Giants can show up with good defensive performances. The 49ers have topped 21 points only 2 times all season. So are we highly confident that the 49ers are going to put up a big game on offense? No, but we are highly confident that the offense will flow through CMC. Another high confidence spot, the Bears doing well against Cincinnati in a likely competitive game. So we already talked about they came out of the bye running the ball a lot more. And then with DeAndre Swift's injuries, they've been splitting the backfield. So we don't have clear certainty on individual players, but again, directional certainty. We have certainty that a high level of confidence that the Bears offense will do well against Cincinnati in a likely competitive game. And then the last spot that I want to highlight with certainty is Mahomes and Josh Allen being asked to throw on their Superman capes early in this game, something that we can feel pretty confident in this spot where both these teams need this win. The Bills are now in a dogfight with the Patriots for division supremacy. One of these 2 teams is going to be playing a wild card game. The smart money is probably still on the Bills being the team that wins the division, and the Patriots being the team that's playing a wild card game. But would you put it past the Patriots to figure out a way to, with a soft schedule, and the Bills still have a few other tough games, to either stay 2 games ahead of the Bills so that even if they lose at home against the Bills, they have the edge in that division, or to figure out a way to win that second game against the Bills at home and just have that huge tiebreaker edge with both wins against the Bills. So this is a huge game for the Bills, but also a huge game for the Chiefs, where they're chasing the Chargers and Broncos in the AFC West, still trying to find a way to get that home field advantage, at least in the first round, maybe even throughout the playoffs. And every one of these games matters for them. So both of these teams will likely ask their quarterback early on to go out there and win the game for them. What does that mean for DFS scoring? We'll have to figure that out, right? You can check the player grid for how I'm looking to attack on this slate, how I'm breaking down some of this stuff more deeply. But I think that this is an important discussion, and actually one of these weeks where I see the value in continuing with the Angles podcast, in that these are some things that we're not necessarily going to be touching on specifically in my other podcasts or in the player grid, but being able to just kind of talk through like the macro of this slate, the picture on the box for how we put together this week's puzzle, and how we think in terms of like a little bit of DFS training, how we think about attacking things, maximizing that certainty and confidence that we have, and where we can find some of those spots in this week. So it might not all trickle down to extremely high confidence on the production of an individual player, but those are all spots that I feel high confidence in the way they're going to play out. As I typically say about my player pool in the player grid, I will almost certainly not have a perfect player pool. There will almost certainly be one or two really strong plays that I miss. There will almost certainly be some plays in my player pool that don't end up hitting, but I can feel confident week in and week out over time that I will have a sharp player pool, that I will have a player pool that can help us win. And we can think about these bets, these high confidence directional bets the same way, right? There might be one or two of them that don't end up playing out the way that we're expecting, but take that group as a whole, and most of the spots will play out the way that we're expecting, and that gives us something to work with for building our rosters this week. All right, we're going to wrap up this show with the bottom-up build. If you're new here, every week we build a roster with a salary cap of $44K or below. We try to think through some of the strategy angles of how we would build if we were competing against other people in a $44K salary cap contest. We also then have a $44K salary cap contest. Obviously, DraftKings is not able to rework the entire salary structure for something like this. So you will build with a $50K salary cap, but the rules are you got to keep it $44K and below to be eligible to win. It is a free contest to enter. It is $100 to first place, and it's just a cool thought exercise to be able to get in there and build with a $44K salary cap. So you can find the link to that in the BUB Challenge channel on Discord and in my player grid, top of my player grid outside the paywall. So even if you're not an OWS member, if you want to join in the fun, you can do that there. My bottom-up build. So let's think about some of these places where we can get some confidence. We can have some confidence that Kareem Hunt is going to be heavily involved for the Kansas City Chiefs offense in this spot. Isaiah Pacheco is out. Brashad Smith is a pass-catching back. They're going to mix him in. But last year, Kareem Hunt averaged 15.5 DraftKings points per game when Isaiah Pacheco was out. He should be priced about 1K higher than he is currently priced, maybe even a little bit higher than that, in a game against the Bills defense that is best attacked on the ground. So Kareem Hunt, pretty high confidence that he will get the touches and that he will have a shot at being part of the scoring for this offense. So he's one of the guys that we will slot in here. Pretty high confidence that we are going to have points scored in that Colts and Steelers game. And so I am going to throw in DK Metcalf and Tyler Warren on this particular roster. So we can say a starting point of Kareem Hunt, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Warren. Now, where are we going to go for a game environment bet? We're trying to save salary here. There's a couple different ways we could do it. I started out this roster with a Flacco and Jamar Chase, decided to go a different direction, and we're going to go with a Mac Jones roster, and we are going to bet on this game environment playing to the upside. So this is a Mac Jones, Christian McCaffrey, Jawan Jennings roster with a Theo Johnson bringback. Again, we're building with a $44K salary cap, so we got to be able to save some salary. Theo Johnson allows us to do that. And with these guys, right, we got Christian McCaffrey on this roster with a $44K salary cap. So that's going to force us to save salary in one other spot. And we're going to throw in Jalen Coker here, a guy who typically when we're looking below 4K at wide receiver, we're looking at the guys who, yeah, they don't get a lot of targets, but they have a downfield role. And so they're going to have a bunch of games with 1, 2, 3 points, but they're also going to have the random 20-pointer one time per season, 2 times per season. So think about Trey Tucker when he was still cheaper, or Tyquan Thornton when he was still cheaper and the Chiefs were banged up. We're talking about these guys who it's like, yeah, you might only get 1 or 2 or 3 points, but once or twice per season, you're going to get that 15, 17, 20-point game. Well, Jalen Coker doesn't fall into that category. He's the slot guy. He's the short area guy that isn't typically going to have the big downfield rolls or the explosive plays, but he sees enough targets that he's clearly mispriced and actually still fits in the same bucket of the guys who can put up 20-plus points once or twice per season. In fact, last year, after Bryce Young, he'd been benched, came back, 7 games that Coker and Bryce Young played together down the stretch. In 3 of those 7 games, Coker scored 14-plus DraftKings points. In 2 of those 7 games, he scored 17 plus DraftKings points. He had a 22 or 24 pointer in there as well. And so basically fits the game log mold of one of these cheaper pieces, even though structurally how he gets there is a little bit different. In fact, he would be expected to hit more often than the typical guy we are targeting down here, where we're saying, hey, cheap with upside. Yeah, he might get 1 or 2 points, but he can get you 20. Well, here's a guy who might get you 5 to 7 points, but can get you 20 and can do that can post that 20-point score at a higher rate than the guys we're typically targeting down here. So interesting way to save salary this week. We'll round this out with the Texans defense. Bo Nix isn't turning the ball over a ton, but anytime we can take the Texans defense at a low price tag, we like going there. And we got to save salary here, right? So this has a spending $43.8K in salary with $6.2K left over. The final roster is Mac Jones at quarterback paired with Christian McCaffrey, Jawan Jennings, and Theo Johnson. Bring back Kareem Hunt rounding out the running back position, Jalen Coker and DK Metcalf rounding out the wide receiver position, Tyler Warren at tight end opposite DK Metcalf, and the Texans defense special teams. Again, $43.8K in salary spent, $6.2K in salary left over. If you go out there and build a bottom-up build yourself, one of the cool things is you can kind of take the skeleton of how you saved salary and then say, hey, now I've got $6K left over to play with, and let me throw in, right? We've already got Christian McCaffrey on this roster, and we've saved $6.2K in salary. We have seen bottom-up build rosters before score 200-plus points, and so there can be ceiling on these rosters, and then you could say, man, where can I spend this extra salary in order to boost my ceiling? So really cool part of that exercise as well. With that, I'm going to get out of here. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Fun as always to sit down and do this with you guys on a Friday morning on my end in the midst of my stream of podcast. We'll have the player grid up maybe by the time you're watching this, but we'll have the player grid up a little bit early this week because of Halloween, heading out with the kids. And so that's mostly written, and I'll finish it up this afternoon and get that out as well. I will see you on the OWS YouTube feed. I will see you on the site throughout the weekend. And as always, I will see you at the top of the leaderboards on Sunday.